were denied opportunity because of unequal educational facilities, and in many instances, teachers who were less qualified. But I can tell you that in reflecting back, the teachers I had, whether they were credentialed or not, were the best teachers that I had from first grade through eighth grade. They worked in the community that I grew up in West Fresno, and I recall each of them, and I know what each of them taught me about life. And when I decided to move back to Fresno from the Bay Area after attending college, I called one of my teachers, and he said, "You would be the first to return to your community as a teacher." Mm-hmm. And he said, "You got the job, and I'll tell you when we start." And that was it. And I didn't see him until the first day of school. Now, I believe that we needed to teach our people to be fearless. And one of the things that I witnessed was young people growing up isolated in West Fresno, but pretty much isolated in an interracial environment, because a mile away was the Armenian community. A little bit from there was the German-Russian community. A little bit from there was the Italian community. And then we had a sprinkling of Portuguese who came from the Azores that sprinkled into the West Fresno community, along with a few Armenian families and one or two Hispanic families. And so within one high school district, Edison High School and Washington High School, it was an integrated community with some of the African American kids attending Washington and the majority of them attending Edison. But I believe that if we could learn to live together and attend school together and have the same access to education as they had, that we could prove that we were equal to them in anything. Mm-hmm. Well, the 1954 Brown versus Topeka, Kansas board that struck down segregated schools was the beginning. Move forward in my experience with Fresno Unified, I now am able to live as a leader in the Fresno Unified School District. This notion that if we can demonstrate to people that we are equal to the task, any task that they can complete, we can. Not that we're better, but we're equal. Well, I found that most didn't believe that. Mm-hmm. So it became a mission of mine to go into places where we were not invited. Mm-hmm. Restaurants, clubs, bars. I did that routinely as a person coming back from the Bay Area, having seen that they seem to get along pretty well up there, and they didn't have those problems that we had in Fresno. Well, pretty soon others were doing it. Then I took that one step further. I made sure my children were always in an environment where if you're growing up black and you know your community, then you can venture out. So they started out at St. Alphonsus, mm-hmm. Then they went to Manchester Gate, and then to Fort Washington Elementary School and the Clovis school system, where they were one and only, not because I wanted to say we're superior, but because I wanted them to see that they could compete with those who have make the decisions about who's going to get get the job, who's going to get into the most prestigious universities, who's going to. I said, we have to be willing to go where we have not been, but we have to overcome our own personal fear. And our personal fear was the fear of not being accepted. All of us have that fear. I had it, but it was a basketball incident that taught me that I was to fear no man. And a young man who was 2 or 3 years older than me, 2 or 3 grades ahead of me, I beat him in basketball one-on-one. He took the ball and hit me in the face with it. And I didn't fight him. But that was a turning point. I decided nobody's ever going to do that to me again. And as a result, I fear no man. But I didn't know that was clearly in the Bible. God says, fear no one, fear nothing. And I've tried to teach and encourage all my kids, all my grandkids, all my relatives, all my colleagues, fear nothing. Step out on faith. Make a statement that says, I have no fear. And what you find is you meet other people who appear to be different in color based on ethnicity, but they end up feeling exactly the way you do, and you become friends. Mm-hmm. Why? Because people, birds of a feather, flock together. Mm-hmm. Now, I can go one step further. I was in the first experiment of desegregation at Lincoln Elementary School, I believe it was 1969. And 2 busloads of Anglos came from Northwest Fresno. And I had just moved from being the executive director of the West Fresno Federation of Neighborhood Centers. We had developed these community centers, and I was the first executive over all of the centers. But I worked 18 hours a day, and my wife said, "If you don't come home, I'm out of here."
Smoke in the city.
I quit my job and chose to go in on a challenge from Jerry Rosander, then Assistant Superintendent of Elementary. He says, I was speaking to the Board of Education and telling them that it is not a major problem to get kids to be successful. And he said, I heard you were once a teacher. He said, it's easy to stand on the outside and throw rocks. Why don't you come in here and practice what you preach? I said, because you guys can't stand honesty. I said, I won't last a minute. He said, as long as I'm the assistant superintendent, you'll last. I said, well, I won't tell you what you want to hear. I'll tell you what I believe is right. Yeah. And he said, I can handle it. Mm-hmm. So I quit my job, and I took the job with Fresno Unified. And he says, I want you to start as a VP at Lincoln Elementary. And we're going to try this desegregation program out. 200 Anglo kids came over and mixed with about 400 or 500 African American and a handful of Hispanic kids at that time. And the result was that the parents from North Fresno was over there every day trying to make sure their kids were not going to get beat up. Mm-hmm. Or they wouldn't be hustled out of their lunch money or something stolen or whatever. Mm-hmm. But they feared for their children. And I was put in charge of discipline. So I asked the board, I asked the principal if I could talk to the parents when we had a first parent meeting. And I said, I can fix this if you trust me. You will have no concern over your children. I will protect them. But here's how I will protect them. You got to give me 2 weeks with the children without coming over and letting them see that you're fearful on their behalf. If you do that, I guarantee you that everything will go well. Well, what are you going to do? I said, just trust me. So they agreed. I identified through play who the most respected students were. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to call their names, and I hope their parents are still living or relatives. One of them was John Zavala. His mom and dad is Mary and John Zavala, who's an attorney here in Fresno. Mary was president of the League of Women Voters. Their cousin, Seth Rubin, his mother was a teacher. Cindy Rubin, Jewish, taught to be fearless. Mm-hmm. John, by his mom and dad being aggressive leaders, taught to be fearless. And John, a little black boy from West Fresno, can't ever think of his last name and haven't gotten it, but John, those 3 could fight. They were fearless, mm-hmm. and everybody knew that if you mess with them, they're going to stand on their own ground. I watched them, and then I brought them in, and I said, look, I need some assistance. What do you mean? What do you need, Mr. Lee? I said, I need some police chiefs. And I says, I'm going to make each one of you my assistant chief. And when you see 2 kids not getting along, you tell them, you need to come with me because you need to see Dr. Lee, or I need to go get him. And we stopped everything, and I had the teachers, instead of lining the kids up in the classroom with the bus riders on one side and the walkers from the neighborhood on the other, I said, mix them by alphabet. They did. So in 2 weeks, it was called natural selection. Kids blended and gravitated toward the kids that were like them. The nerds ran around together.
Yeah.
The three chiefs were the chiefs, and all the other kids lined up because they recognized they were the kids that had the respect of everyone, and they were good students as well. So the point is that we can do more if we allow our young people to take the lead, because they're always pushing the envelope beyond where us old elderly people have been. I try to give away everything that I've ever learned to the young people that I come in contact with, and that's why I can say Christian Flemming is a godson, because I do everything I can to get him to see.
Right.
And I grew up with Richard's dad and his aunts and uncles, and they were leaders in the 50s and 60s. And I was one of those admiring them. So I can tell you that we have a history and a legacy of passing the baton from one to another. The last thing that I would share more than anything else is that as a result of that desegregation effort in 1978 or 9, I felt like this was the beginning of a new era. And Ken Maddie, a friend of mine who passed away some years ago, told me, Joe, desegregation will never happen in Fresno. And I said, I don't agree with you, Ken. And I said, why are you saying that? He said, because I live in Northwest Fresno, and I know my neighbors. And I said, well, I believe in Fresno, and I believe that we have people, good people of all colors. And I think that everyone needs an opportunity. And he said, well, I'll bet you a case of wine, a case of champagne. I said, I don't drink champagne. He'd say, well, what do you drink? I said, I drink a little wine every now and then. He says, well, I'll bet you a case of wine against my case of champagne. You got it. We convinced the federal government not to impose a federal plan that they had devised on the city of Fresno. And they said, make a move and show us that you're serious about desegregating this district with your idea. So the school board decided to move an advanced auto mechanics program from Hoover High School to Edison, and it was 100 students or 150 students that were Anglo that could move if they took the program. But the board approved that and gave it to the superintendent. And somebody had to go and tell the parents that if their kids wanted that program, they had to go to Edison. Now, I happen to be, at that point, a staff person, and the normal person to take that responsibility would have been the assistant superintendent in charge of secondary. I was assistant superintendent of ed services, which was a staff position. And the head over him, the deputy over assistant superintendent, was the associate superintendent. He should have gone, or the superintendent. It should have been one of those three. Nobody would go. I volunteered. And someone said, you're going to go? I said, yeah, I'll go. Well, the meeting is going to be at 6:30 in the morning. It'll be from 6:30 to about 7:30 or 8 when school starts. And principal and some of his staff will be there. Okay. I wanted to know how the parents would react and whether or not they would cause their kids to react, which meant that we would have war in the schools. In order to protect children, I had to know how their parents were going to behave.
Right.
So I went personally to see how they would respond to me. This black face telling 150 to 200 white parents that their kids now have to move from their selected high school where they bought their homes and go over to Edison High School if they wanted this prototype advanced auto mechanic program. The result, I go, and out of that group there were 4 very loud, vocal men, white men, who used every profanity and every name that has ever been called a black man. But they talked about those people, those black people over there were this and that. They were monkeys, they were apes, they were this, they were that, and we're not going to do this. And I said, I'm here to share with you, if you want the program, you would have to go there. And we're doing this to keep the federal government from coming in and imposing a plan that nobody would support and cause us to have civil war in the city of Fresno. I'm here only to share with you, though, and I repeated it for an hour and a half. And at the end of the meeting, the 4 guys who were verbal in attacking African American men and African American people, and me in particular, came up to me one by one and said, I didn't mean that against you. And what I said is about those other people, not you. And it's not fair that the superintendent sent you. I said, I volunteered. You did? And they said, why? And I said, because I believe that there are people with good hearts who will do what's the best. So I go back to the school district office. What happened? What happened?
They can't wait.
They'll do it. I said, they'll do it. Now, I never told them what happened. But later the superintendent said, I talked to some people who were in that meeting, and they said they've never heard or seen someone take so much abuse and remain on target, sharing what the simple message was. And I said, I didn't go there personally. But you know, I can tell you guys now, I thought I was going to protect kids, but God sent me there. I can tell you it's not Joe Lee, because Joe Lee is scared as anybody else. But the faith in me said, you go, protect those kids. Now, I questioned whether or not desegregation was working, because I knew in the city of Fresno, when we reached 51% minority, it would be identified as a racially minority school district and placed on the do not enter list.
That's right.
That's normal all over this country. So I go to the school board and I said, hey, I've talked to Dr. Buchanan out in Clovis, and I've talked to Mr. Collegian, George Collegian, who's the superintendent at Central, and I've got them to see that Fresno is the barometer for this community, including Clovis and Central. So goes Fresno, so goes Clovis, so goes Central. We need more land in northwest Fresno to develop. So Dr. Buchanan says, we'll give you all the land all the way to the river and up to Blackstone. And that would essentially be from about Venice Extension to Blackstone, which is now the Nelson Elementary School community. George Collegian said, we'll give you all of the land all the way from Venice Extension all the way to 99, so, and then to the river. And that's where Rio, one of their junior highs, is located on Herndon over there, in an elementary school. And they said, we agree with you, Joe. So I go to the board and I say, and my own colleague said, oh, that means we'll have to raise the taxes and build schools. No, developer fees is going to help mitigate some of those expenses. We got to have room to grow in northwest Fresno, or this is going to be a racially identified minority school. Here's a minority man telling them that.
Right.
And they said, oh no, we don't want the taxes. I said, this is the beginning of the death knell for the city of Fresno. Why? Because you're going to find out that people will move to the most desirable areas based upon moving away from people of color. And the result will be they can't sell their homes, the values are going to drop. Now in northwest Fresno, their homes are less than the homes in northeast Fresno. Why? Because they bought along the Bullard community. They can't sell it to anybody. They got to live there until they die. There's nobody else going to buy over there because their kids, if they have kids, they go to Bullard High School, and Bullard High School now is 80% minority. So there is history. So I'm saying desegregation didn't help. We lost our Edison High School where we had black student body presidents and vice presidents and leaders being developed in the clubs and so on, and they were spread all over the city. And we haven't had I don't know if we've had a black president of a student body since. I don't know. And I said, but we lost our place to practice leadership skills, and we now are total followers. I questioned that until now. And since George Floyd's shooting, I have witnessed thousands of John Zavalas and Seth Rubins step forward and stand with African Americans. And because of that, I believe that what was started in 1979 is bearing fruit. We have people talking openly about defunding police departments. I'm not suggesting that. We need the police. But I also believe that it's important for everyone to recognize that police are needed, but they need to be part of who we are. And we've witnessed that too with something that everyone claimed that Jimmy Carter was in 1971 or 2, that he was a weak president because he came out of the White House and joined the protesters.
Right.
Now we find police chiefs and mayors across the city, not in large numbers, but in large enough numbers to make a difference. And for people to say, they're right. I don't blame them for protesting. And guess what? They stopped looting for the most part and started focusing on this change effort. And now we have our city, our mayor, willing to talk to the NAACP at Fresno State about the grievances and the things that they'd like to see change before they talk about the police budget.
Right.
That's unheard of in Fresno. And I thank Lee Brand for willing to do that. That's a step in the right direction. I pray that Jerry Dyer can transition from being the chief of police and in many instances reflecting the kind of behavior with his own people that have been demonized across the country in the last few days. We need to have a change. And I don't know if that will happen, but I believe Jerry is strong enough to do it, but that means that he's going to have to step out on faith and not be concerned about what people think of him.
Yeah.
That's the fear that every leader has. Will I be accepted? I never, from the time I was hit in the face with that basketball, I never ever thought I have to have a crowd to support me, because I know I have no fear and I know where I'm going when I die. But I didn't find that out until later in life, because I've never been a devout Christian, but I believed in what I was taught. And then I realized that what I was taught is what I'm now practicing and preaching every day, which is God's love in me is greater than anything out there. And we can overcome what we see if we trust in the words that he gave us as his promises to the people who believe in him. So if there is anything that I can share worthwhile going forward or looking back, it's to be able to see how each of us play such a vital role that no one, including those that we consider to be our enemies, have been placed in a position without God's approval. Trump is the antithesis of Obama. Who do you trust the most? Who lies the least? Who's more willing to take care of the least among us? Who is inclusive? Who's divisive? You choose. That's the choice of every man. But there's a person, there's that little spirit inside of us that says, I would rather be a part of my neighborhood friends who think like this than to stand on justice, righteousness. I'm afraid of being singled out as being out of step with them. So I don't know if I'll say anything. So that's complicit, meaning that that sign that says white silence is white violence means what it says. Is complicit in accepting something that none of us want to accept.
Yeah, when I look at elected officials, there's a few that are outspoken, but the majority, and I'm not even going to say majority, I see some elected officials in Fresno, current and past, that have been elected into positions of leadership and been silent on everything. It's like they made more noise during the campaign, and once they got into the seat, they just disappeared. Well, they disappeared into the seat, and it could be because of some of the things that you're saying, but also if you're a leader and you're not fearless and you don't have tough skin, you're not going to throw yourself out there to be attacked because you don't want to be attacked. That's that thing. I think so many elected officials want to walk that line and they don't want to piss nobody off, or they'll say their beliefs to their family and friends, but they'll never come out and talk about it. Everything's hush hush. And so when you talk about that silence, it's like, okay, you're an elected official, you're representing a district or a community of people, but you're silent on anything, or you state the obvious, or you sound cliche on everything that you come out on, where you're really not showing who you are. So, just my opinion, but I get very critical of things like that, because I'm like, if you're an elected official, what the heck did you take the office for? To stick your head in the ground? You took a public office to stick your head in the ground? I don't like that.
And then all right, let me respond to that just a moment. I don't like it either, but I recognize something. First of all, when anyone gets into any position, it's by the divine right of God. That's what I believe. Whether they speak out or they don't speak out. But if they don't speak out, then it falls back on the followers who put them in office to stand up and tell them. Right. Now, if you're looking for prototype leadership, probably the greatest in our community, consistent over the years, have been Mary Curry. Mary Curry started out advocating for the fairness of black kids, just like Black Lives Matter. She then ran for the school board, but she expanded that where it matters for all kids to be treated fairly. And she has believed that way and continued to fight that way. If you want a role model, she had no fear. Now you have to start with whether or not she felt that she needed to be accepted. She didn't. She didn't feel like she had to be accepted. She knew she had to be right according to God's plan. And when you stand on justice and fairness, which is what I witnessed with her, and that's what I was doing, then she was the epitome of leadership that was elected. Now, I'm not critical of any of our other elected officials, and the reason that I'm not is because each of them contributes something. Whether we like it or not, they contribute. But here's the point. They could contribute more if they could relieve themselves of the fear of not being accepted. It's either accepted by the persons that they think are in power, or the persons that they think they're representing, or they limit themselves to one way of doing things without opening up and understanding how everyone feels, and listen to them and say, you're right. I'm going to give you the mic, and I'm going to stand next to you because you can say it because of your passion better than I. We have to be willing to share that mic. And sometimes we're so eager to be known as a leader, we look for photo ops and everything.
Hey, didn't we just talk about that?
So you run around looking at. I'm not a photo op person. I'm not a leader of crowds.
Nope.
I just believe what I believe, and I do what I believe, and I share it in the way that I hope people will support.
Exactly.
But if they don't, I don't worry about it. I know that if they're not, and this is from one of my favorite sayings that I got from Willie Brown. You know, today's enemy is tomorrow's ally. So I'm not gonna tell anybody that I have a problem with them because I know that God's in charge, and we have to embrace people, even people we don't like.
Yeah, we have to.
We have to do that to be willing to move this agenda that says inclusion, and that every man was treated equal in the eyes of God, or should be treated equal in the eyes of God. That's the goal. It's not, I'm better than you, but no man could tell me. The guy who recruited me in says, "Oh, Joe, I want you to be the assistant superintendent of staff development and educational services." I said, "You can want me wherever you want, but I'm going to put my name where I want to be.
Yeah.
You got to pick. You're the boss. I'll work for you, but you can't tell me where I'm going to go without me saying where I want to go."
Yeah.
Now, I pointed out where I want to be in charge of elementary schools. I want to be in charge of secondary. That's where the action is. That's where you make change. And he says, "No, I want you to be here." Well, I had to find how to make change. So it was through the federal money. All of the federal dollars came into Fresno, flowed through my hands. So I had to make sure that everybody did what they were supposed to do. If they're not doing it, I can't support you. I can't give you that federal money. I'm not going to jail. No, so it was an influence. And the same man who told me in 1964 he had hired his quota of minority teachers. And I said, "Well, who is that and how many?" 1964. I was coming from the Bay Area. I taught at Oakland High School and in the first EOP program at the University of California, Berkeley. I come back to Fresno. I first wanted to check Fresno before I called my former teacher who was in West Fresno. He said, "I had my quota." Quota? What's your quota? He said, 1 black, 1 Mexican, and 1 Armenian.
Was that affirmative action back then?
No affirmative action. Wasn't
That
even.
was the quota.
That was his quota, huh?
And right here, and then I came back. I want to buy a house over on Olive out by Fresno City College. Restrictions and covenant says do not sell
Red
to
line.
blacks, do
Red
not sell
line.
to Armenians, do not sell to Hispanics. I'm saying, what's wrong with this town? Now, I had grown up here, but I had blinders because no one in the school talked about social justice.
No.
They talked about reading, writing, and arithmetic. And when compensatory education came in 1965, I was working at Ivy Junior High. I go in and talk to the same guy who was a superintendent who hired me, and I said, "This is an opportunity to help these kids in this area. We can get more of the fun." We don't want any. We don't want any of the federal people snooping around here. What is he talking about? I didn't know until a year after I was in that school that they had no school board meetings, that the 3 men that was on the board lived on the coast, and they were white. Now, my point I'm making is that I'm in an all-black school with a handful of Hispanics there, and they're telling us we don't need any money because we don't want him poking around. So I left the district and went to North Avenue Community Center a year later and organized a community to hire the first black superintendent in Fresno County. I got my brother on the board. I think one that a lot of people can say whatever they want about, James Tucker, who was on the board for 30-some years, and a young lady. And those 3 hired Frank Johnson, whose Grapevine magazine was just highlighted at the Fresno State Library
Yeah.
with all the historical things. So when you start looking for how people, we were all connected. Frank was the first superintendent. That board hired him. When they came on the board, the one that hired me, bless his heart, he liked me, but he didn't trust those other black folk. Now, why they trust me? Because I had become like him. I went to a white institution, and it was a good one, and I learned all the things he learned, so I'm more like him.
Yeah.
So I can accept
Commonality.
We can't forget where we come from.
No.
I couldn't.
No.
I still donate to West Fresno. Why? That's where I'm from. I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
And when somebody asks me, what do you do? I'm just a cotton picker, man. I pick grapes, pick cotton, and somehow I stumbled through school, and they made me a school superintendent. But you know what? I'm just a cotton picker.
Yeah.
I worked hard, and I still do, but I do it because I love the people.
Yeah.
And you can't help people if you don't love them.
No.
So one of the things that we have to do is encourage young people to find ways to get together, because when you do that, you're creating what I didn't realize I was creating. Now I see it on national television all over the country. Because we did it here, I was lifted up by the U.S. Office of Education, taken to Columbia, South Carolina, which is where they were hanging black people every other day. And they said, we're going to desegregate this school district next year, and we said, we understand you're a trainer who knows how to get people together. And they put me in a room with 32 men, 16 white and 16 black. 16 white were the principals. 16 black, who had been in an all-black school district, and this was in the summer before they started in September, were principals that had been demoted to vice principal. Now I'm supposed to make a team.
Remember the Titans.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
And I go, so that's the job. I'll take it. Why? I didn't take it because I had the answer. I really didn't. I took it because I knew if I could get these people to work together, those black kids who were going to be going into the white schools where all the white students had went to private schools. Now the school belongs to the black kids, but the principal was white. I said, how do I get them to see that they're going to have to make an environment that's conducive to good learning? And so I go in, just introduce yourself. And we go around the table, and I say, as a part of introducing yourself, would you do one other thing? Would you please tell me what you would be doing if you weren't here right now? And everybody said, oh, you know, I'd be fishing, I'd be in Florida, I'd be here, we'd be doing this. And we got to the leader of the white group. I didn't know he was a leader at the time. His name was Bo. And he says, well, I'd be coon hunting. And I didn't know if he was talking about. I didn't know if he was talking about
some real coons.
I know the word coon meant black folks.
Yeah.
So I said,
Oh no.
I looked at him and I said, oh, that's interesting. And he was the last one. And I said, but you know what? In California, we do a lot of pheasant hunting and rabbit hunting. And I said, where I come from, I know where you can hem up a rabbit and they fight like hell. Next. Now, what did I mean? I don't know if you calling me or these brothers coons. But if you are and you think you're going to hem me up with your intimidation of the use of that word, this is who I am and I'll fight you like hell. That's what I was saying. But I didn't respond negatively.
No.
It was, he took it literally like it was a real rabbit is going to fight back. Guess what? He became my strongest ally. And guess how it changed? He said, Joe, can you get me some Rose Bowl tickets? Because you're going to USC. I was working on my doctorate. and I think I was in the middle of it, about 70, that was 71 or 72. And he said, I said, yeah. He said, boy, I like the way them boys run that ball over there. We need some at Alabama. He had played at Alabama. He was a big guy. He said, we need some of them boys. And he was talking just like that. I can't change his vernacular.
No.
I can't change his
No.
speech pattern.
No.
But he wasn't degrading us by
No.
using that word. Well, I like the way them boys run over there. So finally, 2 days before we ended our 8-week session, he said, it ain't fair. After we done went through all these exercises for me to show them that it wasn't fair the way the district is dealing with this. And you can't make a team if people don't start with, it's fair,
Yeah.
which is where we are with the justice system right now. So he says, it ain't fair that these here boys here, and he used the word boy again, that they got, some of them are older than these white boys, and he called them boys too, and they gonna need their retirement just like we need our retirement. He said, I know the superintendent pretty well. He said, Joe, why don't you go see him and see if he can't make half of these boys some principals. We went in, talked to him. They made 8 black guys principals and demoted the youngest white guys to vice principals. Said, when these others retire, you'll have a chance to move up.
Yeah.
And I was successful. They gave me a parade at Fort Jackson, and I ended up before the Columbia State House, which is the state capitol, like Sacramento's our state capital. They gave me the Joe Lee Day with a big old plaque, and I didn't do it by myself. I took a team of people with me.
Right.
I had a team. One of them was Jim Aldridge's wife. She was my number one supporter. Hey, I even had my wife back there. I said, here, honey, you sit with these women and drink mint juleps. See,
Wear big
it was
hats.
all it was all to show that we want the same thing that they want.
Yeah, of
Right.
course we do.
And it wasn't by accident. I was consciously making decisions based on what I thought would cause people to feel comfortable with one another. And when you do that and you take away the fear of he's trying to figure out how to take something from me, or he want what I got and he gonna steal it or take it, you can't develop relationships with that. You gotta have time to sit down and do that. I've recently challenged ministers on that same basis. It's good to hold hands on Martin Luther King in March, but what do you do the other 364 days out of the year?
Right.
You know, how about visiting each other's church? How about having socials together and having members get to know one another without the fear of somebody's trying to proselyte your congregation?
Right.
See, all of these are issues that go into demonstrating what we were doing with young kids. And you just showed me something, Christian. One of your students at Bullard, a young Anglo lady, young student, challenging her parents on their belief system about African Americans. That's powerful. Whoever she is, my hat is off to her. But I can tell you right now, that's happening all over America now.
Well, you know, when you're in athletics, the Heisman Trophy winner, guy came from LSU, Burrow, right? He come out and spoke out about social injustice, about George Floyd. You know, so when you have athletics, you know, and I think about Remember the Titans, I think about my buddy Richard Felder. He made a post about how athletics crosses over. So if you're especially like in college, if you're the all-American white boy, right, and you come from a very wealthy family, and you go play at a big school, Alabama, Georgia, or something, you're hanging around with black kids that are social economically different from you. So now you're either gonna learn the culture, identify with the culture, or something, right? And you're gonna say to your parents hey, what you guys are talking about, because you haven't interacted with African American kids like I have. Dad, they're not that bad. Mom, they're not that bad. Like, I met these people. And my Uncle Lionel was in Vietnam. And he told me a story one time about how white guy from Kentucky would watch him sleep at night. And he would always tell him, man, what are you doing, man? He said, well, my grandfather told me you guys grew tails at night. And my uncle Lionel said,
that was a common statement during World War II before it was integrated. Go ahead.
And so my Uncle Lionel said, what the hell are you talking about? He says, so my grandfather told me, he says, I've never been around no black people till I joined the military. I've never been around no black people. I never. So him and my Uncle Lionel ended up becoming good friends. And I think when the guy passed away, my Uncle Lionel went to the funeral, and his family was very grateful. My Uncle Lionel actually got to speak at at the funeral, and his brother and I think one of his uncles were blown away because they never had interaction with black people. It took their brother going to the military
to open the
and
door,
sharing the experience of black people to take back to the family to report. So you really do, and I was back, in Vietnam, but I still think there's still those disconnects right now today.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Well, it is, but there are things that's taking place in spite of the way a lot of people want to believe. One is the effective use of technology, which is what we saw with George Floyd in the real-time death of George Floyd. We also have the ability to see how sports has integrated. And one I will point out is what the NFL commissioner said, we made a mistake when we did not allow open dissent among our players. See, they now realize that Kaepernick, who was refusing to go along with the mainstream and got on his knees by himself, and he had Eric Reed join him when he was with the 49ers. And then you had the owners with Trump encouraging them to treat them like this and intimidate, take their salary, cut them out, do this, do that. Now the NFL commissioner is apologizing on behalf of all the teams. Why? Because the overwhelming majority of football players are African American, and they can't stand by and play anymore for teams where these guys are saying, we want to keep you like you are a high-paid slave on the plantation. Now that's real. We also have interracial marriages.
Yeah.
And we have interracial children being born. And we have families of all, as I indicated before the program, I can't isolate black people from my family because I got Hispanic and Anglo and Asian in my family.
Yeah, my family is a great American melting pot.
So what we have to do is we have to remember, and the Bible said it this way, whoever is adopted into a family should be treated better than your own.
Yeah.
Okay? So when you do that, what we're doing is we're opening our arms and we're including all people, and we're willing to stand on the belief that all men are created equal in the sight of God, and that all of us have a role to play. And if we play our role well, it connects in accordance with God's plan. We are in harmony when we are at peace.
Yeah.
When we are not at peace, we are not in harmony, and the seeds of discontent are being spewed by our president, and his supporters are complicit in that by saying absolutely nothing until we see what's happened recently with the breaking of military leadership, with several of the senators saying they do not support what the president is doing and why he's doing it. bringing out the military against individuals who have the right to protest under the Constitution. So what we've got to do is continue to reach out in love and not be so concerned about which step is the right step. All steps moving forward are right. Each of us have a different route. If you're playing golf and you got 4 guys out there or you got 10 guys out there, each one of them approach that game a little different, and they line up and look at things different, and one's ball go one way and another one goes another way, but but the end result is to get it in that last hole.
That's right.
At the lowest shot. So what I see is that's the way all of us work. We're on our route, but we may be wiggling and waggling, and some are going straight and some are walking backwards. But God's plan is that we connect and that we're all one. And I just can't encourage people enough to say, don't attack when you know you're winning, but you consistently protest and you stand up and call a spade, and I don't
It
mean
is what it is.
literally.
Yeah.
But you call whatever it is. You
It is
call
what
the
it
truth.
is.
I didn't know if you were saying about Bo and the coon. No.
But we've got to be
I-
willing to do that, Richard. And
Right.
I just hope that this podcast. I'm so happy to see you guys trying to do this. Our history is important. You know, I always ask the question. I'm a history major. Now, someone says, "Well, what did you know about Black history?" Zero, because when I went to school, there was no Black history.
You lived
They didn't tell me
Yeah, you
anything
watched
about
us.
Black
Yeah,
history. I
it was
learned
a
the Black
reality.
history. I learned reading on my own
Yeah.
and
Right.
listening to people like Kai Hende who preaches on it, and I love.
He
I
finally
love listening
retired.
to
He
that.
finally retired.
He
But I
finally
can tell you
retired.
this. I can tell you this. We have history, but we were recording it via the drum beat, and most people don't realize that.
Yeah.
We pass on our history via the drums. How did the Indians who came before Columbus and Da Gama, how did they record their history? We don't know, because we're wiping them out. Europeans wiped out the Indians. If it wasn't with health issues, it was just open warfare. Because they discovered the land that the Europeans wanted.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know, because we haven't studied.
Right.
And we'll find an old graveyard where an Indian burial site, and go to digging around, and you start finding these relics that indicate what it was about and what it was for. But that's what I'm talking about. Our history is recorded in different ways, but no one has wanted to know.
I
And they
wanna
wanted
know.
to cut us off from our history, because a man that don't know where he's coming from cannot know where he's going.
Well,
and that's exactly
Well,
what
you know,
this is about.
the other thing about history for me, and I think for the students that I deal with, it's empowering, because when you don't know history, like you said, you're in school, zero Black history, right? So now there's schools that have social justice classes, African American study classes, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's not empowering enough, because it's the criteria, and a lot of these social justice classes and African American study classes aren't even being taught by African Americans. They're being taught by Anglos that are teaching these classes. And I'm not saying that an Anglo's not qualified to teach those classes. It's not what I'm saying. That was the big stink at Gaston when that one teacher was trying to get over there. But what I'm saying is, history empowers you when you know that your ancestors done something so wonderful. And I'm not just talking about way back. I'm talking about if you're in the city of Fresno and you know about what you've done, Jim Aldridge, the list goes on of trailblazers, right? The Mary Curries. I walked in the African American Museum and seen all those Black people and asked about their stories and the things that they're done. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. Because going back to what you said, when I was coming into Fresno and I would start opening up my big mouth, I had no idea of the history. I had no idea of all the people that have done something in this town because there was no one to share that information with me. I wasn't going to hear it in the school district, and I didn't know no one here to talk about it until I met you. And I met Mr. Aldridge, and I met a couple other people, and they were able to share the history. It made a big difference. So my perspective of Fresno changed because I said, wow, they did have trailblazers. They did. What's going on now? And when I say what's going on now is you have organizations of African American people. You might have an organization that only has 4 people in it. You have another organization that has 6 people in it. You have another organization that have 8 people in it. And I was always kind of confused, and maybe you can elaborate. Maybe you can elaborate. Why? Where's the unity in that?
I'll tell you what the. See, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that fear prompts all of us to want to be accepted. And the other part of that is that everybody wants to be a leader, and they don't recognize that they're not the leadership material. What it is we all have a role, and when you recognize your role and you stay in your lane, then we can work together. But what happens is everybody wants to be known as a leader. Now, it's a desirable attribute for most people, but the key is that we can't all be the leader. We have to, in order to lead, you must have followers. And the followers have to believe that the leader is honest and trustworthy. And when you don't believe that the leader is honest and trustworthy, you end up with very few followers. Right. So it's a circular thing. But here's what I do feel strongly about. I believe that everyone wants to do something for betterment.
Correct.
So I try to keep that as the highest level and not worry about whether it's 2 people in it, 3 people in it, or 10 people in it, or hundreds. It's whether or not they're doing what they should be doing to help positive movement. Mm-hmm. So that's critical to us working together. Now, when we look at Fresno that way, what have our leadership in Fresno been effective in doing? Cutting off the elderly from the youth.
There's a big disconnect.
It sure is.
Hold it. But that disconnect is bought into by the people they select as the leader.
That makes sense.
Now you understand something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When the chief of police, Jerry Dyer, wanted to have influence over Black Lives Matter and where they met and I happened to be at a church where he suggested that I should talk to Pastor DJ Kreiner because he was going to get somebody killed trying to close down Freeway 41. And I said, I don't believe he's trying to do that. That's not in his DNA. Well, one of the college students who was a committee member of Black Lives Matter suggested that they meet at Bullard and 41, and they were going to close down Freeway 41 to highlight Black Lives Matter. Okay, now
that's kind of dangerous.
I never had a chance to talk to DJ for some reason. I went over to meet him several times, and we missed each other. But I was going to share with him, if you have any knowledge, you should be careful. But I believe the chief should have called him, not tell me.
Not you.
Okay, but out of being concerned for DJ, I had to go tell him because I didn't want him not to know. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, what we have to do is we have to look at who says you're a leader.
Yeah.
See, one thing is Lee Brand put together a committee just recently, and he isn't going to identify people who are known. He's going to identify people in a titled position.
Correct.
That don't mean you're a leader.
No.
Sure don't.
You can have a job and not be a leader.
Correct.
So you have to be known as someone who is outspoken, who is willing to stand up and speak truth to power. And when you do that, that means they might step on my toes. And I don't want that to happen.
Correct.
So they look for people who think and act like them.
Of course.
So we have to push back, and the young people that are out there now, they need to be the ones saying, we need that. Jim Aldridge, I'll give you that example. Jim Aldridge is my leader. That's who my leader is. And the reason he's my leader is because he demonstrated over and over again how to work effectively with people without killing anybody off.
Mm-hmm.
And he moved this city forward till it became an all-American city.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do everything, and we worked together, and he supported me. I did it in the school system the way he did it in the city. But they don't want to hear from us. You know why? Because we speak truth to power. And when you speak truth to power,
Man,
you know, I'm not going to
Things
be
are
called
making
by
a
the
lot of
county
sense now.
superintendent.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be called. I'm not going to be called. But I've offered my assistance to the superintendents.
Yeah, they will.
They're not going to call me. They're going to call somebody who think and talk and
Yes.
behave like
Like
them.
them.
And the result is
that
we
was
can't
gonna
do
be
it.
that was gonna be my next question, because when anything happens, it's always the same people. And now you explained it.
Of course
it's the
it's simple.
same
Yeah.
people. They
It's
don't
simple.
want anybody new, a new perspective, nothing new, business as usual.
Follow the script.
But hold it. Your program ought to be focused on real leadership, and real leadership comes from those people in the streets saying,
right.
"This is who
This
we
is who we
listen
listen
to
to."
because
Right.
this is who we trust."
Grassroots.
And when you don't trust somebody, I know a lot of people, and I know they trust me. But
Yeah.
I'm not looking to be a leader.
No.
I don't go around
Yeah.
saying, "Let me lead,
Yeah.
let me lead."
Yeah.
Not like Jim Aldridge isn't either.
No.
Jim said, "Hey," and me and him both talk about it. We done gave him our pound of flesh. but you know what? When you care, you never stop giving.
No.
Mary Curry, she could be a wonderful asset to my cousin Keisha Thomas, because Mary has experienced it in and out all over. And I suggested that when she went in. Now, I don't know if she's consulting with Mary. I haven't talked to either one of them for a while, but I hope she is. But that's who I pointed her to. I said, I can tell you about education, and I don't have to go to board meetings and know what they're going to do.
Huh.
I do that. I do that consistently. Why? Because I know the pattern.
Yep.
The pattern isn't from the past. The pattern is the individual who's in charge, and if you witness that person's pattern, you know what the pattern will be.
Yep.
So predictability is something you learn. Jim
Yep.
and I had to do that because we had no reconnaissance out there. We didn't have black people in every department. We didn't
No.
have them all over the place. So we had to learn to read behavior. And when you do that, then you can anticipate where you're going to have problems and how you might mitigate those problems in order to move forward.
And you won't show up to a whole bunch of meetings.
you know, when you say meetings, I ain't interested in no meetings.
I'm good with that.
Hey, just say who's gonna be there,
And we'll see if he's going to be in attendance.
no. If I tell him about a meeting
Uh-huh.
and he says who's gonna be there, he'll tell me the outcome of the meeting. And for a while, I said, "Man, let me go see." I go to the meeting, I come back.
And that's
he
exactly
says,
what's up.
"Man, you were spot on."
Well,
That's it. But with today's issues going on, with the Black Lives Matter, and you brought up earlier before we got on the set, in regards to knowing what's going on in Fresno, California when it comes to crime and, police disobedience, right? Black on black crime. And you mentioned something of that matter, and I was going to say that it's all important, right? And yes,
Yes.
we should all of us should have an eye on
that's right.
each subject. I know it's different, but you're right. We all should have
Everything,
eye on
yeah.
everything, because you can't discredit one for the other. We
Correct.
know what went on with police brutality has been going on. It wasn't for the mighty cell phone cameras.
Yeah.
Technology is a godsend.
because it's a lot of stuff that went on that
Yeah.
didn't catch the feeds. And moving forward, like you stated, in our neighborhoods with gay violence, right? Yes, that issue we still should be, that should be on the top priority also, you know. So I'm not disagreeing with you. It all matters, I think, the same. You know, understand what I'm saying? All lives do matter, but I don't want to take the focus off what's going down. I don't, you know, what's going
I
down.
agree
It's
with that.
just police brutality,
I
right?
agree with
So,
that.
you know, and I love the issues about the history, right, and supporting because with the desegregation, when I was part of that. Had to go to school on the other side of town. You have Klan cards all on the, when you walk in, there's Klan cards. Join the Klan, right? That wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Right? So all these
They're allowed to have that after school?
So all these subliminal messages.
But I'm saying they allowed that after school?
Oh, it was allowed.
Wow.
Okay?
See?
And when it came to supporting one another, one of my favorite photos is when Muhammad Ali didn't join the military, and he had, you know, Lew Alcindor, who was Lew Alcindor at that time? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Jim Brown, as supporting with all the supporting staff, right? I mean, supporting athletes, and it's going full circle with the NFL doing NBA, NFL, and that's shows great progress. However, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and like you stated, creating policy, right? Because we keep talking about it, and I don't want to sound, you know, that I don't agree with it. I agree with the peaceful protest, right? But after that peaceful protest, the fire shouldn't stop burning. I don't mean the buildings. I mean what we trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
This is one of the ways that you keep it. Our history in Fresno is this, and this is stated more often than you realize. Let them do anything for 2 weeks, and after that, they'll forget what they were out there for.
Man.
See, and that's what.
And what you have to do is you have to be vigilant about change. Change is something that comes in incremental steps. My grandson was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and I said, Bernie will never win. And Bernie was way ahead, and Joe Biden was in 4th place. He said, who are you supporting? I said, Biden. He said, why? He doesn't stand up for anything. I said, no, I'm going to tell you why. Because Biden has been trained by Obama. And Biden has gone from a centrist to a spiritual leader because he witnessed a spiritual leader and how he ran the country. You don't believe that, do you? No, because he did. I said, that was before he met Obama. What have you seen out of him? You check it out. You check it out. And that's the same way I talk to you. Said, you don't deal with a person, and I love Bernie, because he's talking about the progressive issues that we need to be addressing. But it isn't going to resonate with the majority of the voters. Why? It's a big jump. Change is incremental for most part. Now, this George Floyd has pushed the envelope. Now they're willing to talk about justice, Justice Department, and fair treatment all across this country, even in redneck country. Ferguson, Missouri, where a young man got killed.
Yeah.
They just elected their first black mayor. It was just 5 or 6 years ago that happened. Now they got a black mayor. Okay, so what I'm saying is, you got to know God put you here to carry the baton for only so long, and you know in the Bible it says that we're just like and we're gone, or like we're spit in the ocean. If we're just an ounce of water, we're just a spit in the ocean.
Right.
So what it comes down to is we got to realize that movement forward, and it don't mean that we can't get there. It means that you've got to keep fighting the fight until you die. That's the reason I never took a job anywhere other than Fresno. This is where I was born. I was mistreated in elementary school when my mom was in the hospital. Went to a little all-white school out in Raisin City. And it was a one-room schoolhouse with a potbelly stove, and we all ate beans out of the same pot. And there were two other kids in there that would play with me, both Asian, who had been in internment camps over in Arizona. And they played with my hair trying to feel it, and their favorite song was Old Black Joe.
No.
I cried the first day that I was there. And I started to cry the second day, and I said, I'm never going to cry again, and when I grow up, I won't let this happen to any kid. Now, that's a defining point in my life. I look back and I thank God for that experience. That was adversity. I overcame it. And later, the same kids that didn't play with me, I ended up being in relationships with them in high school, and I was their leader. I was their leader. And I was the quarterback on the football team, the point guard in basketball,
Right.
And I played a little tennis. I could beat the #1 tennis player, but I didn't like playing in heat, so I didn't play in the summer. But it came down to trying to show people that whatever I choose to do, I will do. But the only thing that I gained from that is what started out as negative turned out to be positive.
Yeah.
So don't think in short steps because somebody don't do what you think they should. Just make sure that they're doing whatever it is positive. And they may only make an inch. You may make a foot. And somebody else go to 10 yards. So we gotta be open to whatever people contribute. Encourage them, open our arms to them, love them as if they're our brothers, and that's what God wants us to do, and not sit in judgment. And my last statement on judgment is, those who say they're Christians, who line up as evangelicals and claim to not like people because they for gay and lesbian marriage or therefore abortions. That's a morality issue which should be judged by the Lord himself. And our job is to love them in spite of what they have done, so that we may be able to influence them to live according to what we do believe. And that's by modeling theory. The rest of it, let God deal with them. You know, I can't get my son into heaven. That's what the Bible says. So if I can't get him into heaven, I can pray for him and encourage him. But he has free will.
Yeah.
And he'll make a choice.
Yeah.
And when we go against anybody's free will, we're violating their civil rights.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's the end of it.
That's why, you know, at point in times, I'm a very opinionated person. And I still won't let people censor my opinion. You just don't have to agree with it.
That's right.
And my philosophy is, if we're civil, we can agree to disagree. But what I've noticed with the African American community, when you're talking about, you know, give it 2 weeks, see what happens. When something first hits the African American community, anger and emotion oversees everything. We're very emotional people. So when emotion,
That's true.
and I had to learn how to take my emotion out. Because there were so many things that I tried to fight for, so many things that I wanted to happen, and I would always let my emotions get involved. And you would mentor me, and you would tell me, you can't be like that, you can't be like that. But there's so many other African Americans in the African community that are just emotional people. So once our emotions are taken out, and it usually takes about 2 weeks, depending on the type of person you are, about 2 weeks before you calm down. You're like,
Right.
okay, now I can think about this. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, are you still going to lead the same way? Are you still going to think the same way? Has your thought process changed? Has your mindset changed? I know for me, after I spoke to him and he puts it in a different perspective, because I'm angry, I'm emotional, I'm like, this makes sense. You know, like, this is the right thing to do. But I'm being blocked. You know, why? It's not for me, it's for the kid. Like, it all makes sense. So I used to say, this is a personal attack against me. Like, they don't like me, so they don't want to help the kids or whatever, right?
Right.
But it was all my emotions.
Right.
And so he would just coach me up, mentor me, and get me through it. And then eventually, I never gave up. And God always says we're overcomers, right? So between my perseverance, being mentored, and not giving up, things got done. And my emotions were taken out. Because once my emotions were in,
Can't focus.
I be calling him. He be saying, "Calm
Calm
down,
down.
boy. You
Can't
better."
focus. Right.
And I'm going like, "Oh,
Well, that was the same. That's the same kind of coaching. See, what I did with you is exactly what they need in Fresno Unified and most all these school districts.
Mm-hmm.
If you hire good people who can relate to our kids, they're going to run into doors that are going to be slammed in their face. They're going to run into people who block everything that they do, and they're going to feel frustrated. What you have to do is you have to have someone there who understands how that system works and coach them through how to overcome and do it the right way. And the result is that everybody is happy. And they go, oh, that makes sense. Okay? Now, I've tried to share that with the superintendent. I've tried to share it with the HR man. And I've tried to share it in the department. I've taken people down there that are good people, but they don't recognize them. They don't see them as I see them because they see them as a black face or as a brown face, and they'll say, oh, yeah, we're going to take care of them. And then I wait, and 6 months later, they still not, there's nobody dealing with them. But the reason why is that they have tests that they put in that's supposed to give them knowledge, but they don't read the spirit of the individual. If you don't have the ability to read the spirit of the individual, you're just hiring people who are going to be like you.
Yeah.
So you judge based on what you are.
Right.
And if you think you good, you got that person's good too. But if you want to change a system, you got to get people who know how to work with kids who don't think like you. That's where I always worked, is helping my people understand how to work in an environment where they were not accepted.
Man.
And on the other hand, how to accomplish at every level, whether they were a teacher aide, a
Campus
bus
safety?
driver,
Campus safety?
a campus assistant, a vice principal, or an assistant superintendent. It didn't matter. But because I was that way, I mentored people who became superintendents all over the state. So when I left Fresno Unified and walked away, people said, what are you going to do? I'm not leaving Fresno. I called six superintendents and said, I need a contract for $12,000 for 6 months. Okay, you got it. What do you want to do? I said, you tell me what you have a problem with and I'll work on that for you. So I had jobs away from Fresno in other school districts where people trusted me more than my own people.
Man.
And but that's because if you help people, you are spreading God's good news. And then when you need some help, he reciprocates.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. And I thank God every day because I realize that he made me that way, and I don't have to go around trying to prove anything to anybody. I'm just naturally that way.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah, that's
some great topics, great conversation about what's going on today, the history. Love listening to Dr. Lee. I could sit here all day and listen to him. I ran out of ink trying to think of something.
Nah, we better get on out of here, man.
You know, where we at with where we at? We got more time for more. Okay, so we're going to take a break here. Mad Talk TV, Word on the Street show. We'll be right back.
Now, I was going to say, since this